All right. Oh, perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming today. This is our second seminar from our seminar series here in SOS, our first job market practice talk by Adam Wiechman today, who's going to be talking about designing climate-ready institutions for infrastructure investment. We'll go for 45 minutes and then 15 minutes with questions. And Jenny asked me to remind you that the next seminar is next week, October 2nd, with Rebecca Karaoke.
Test. Cool. Hi, everyone. As Danae said, my name is Adam Wiechman. If we haven't already met before, I'll be giving an overview today of my research, past, current, and future. Today's talk is titled Designing Climate-Ready Institutions for Infrastructure Investment. In sustainability, we spend a lot of time talking about flows between the environmental and social systems that we care about. But the inescapable reality to these flows is that many of them are mediated by infrastructure. And by that, I refer to any coherent structure that modifies the flow of material or information in a system, which expands our definition outside of kind of what you may intuitively think of with physically built structures of roads or bridges, for instance, to include other soft forms or even green forms of infrastructure that do kind of similar modification of flows that we care about. But all of these structures are subjected to the laws of physics and therefore cannot escape entropy. So we must invest in them. And because a lot of our shared infrastructure systems are public, owned or operated or are regulated by public entities, there's a political economic process associated with their investment. And when looking at a lot of the challenges with modern infrastructure systems today, whether they assume a period of stability that's no longer the case, they're chronically underfunded, or they have disproportionate access, I argue that understanding this political economic process of investment is essential to addressing these challenges. Hopefully, I don't have to do too much work to convince you that this is a problem, for instance, in the US. We can point to multiple cities that are facing water supply challenges due to infrastructure investment problems. We can point to even cases in our own backyard in Arizona where public transit is chronically underfunded due to political challenges, as well as a constrained electric grid and capacity due to political investment hurdles. What I do for my conceptual approach is I've begun with a lot of the great work in engineering and economics that has sought to understand how the built infrastructure or soft infrastructure, the operating rules of our systems, can be made to be robust to uncertain social and climate futures. And what I mean by robustness is the preservation of a desired output given changes in input, or the opposite of sensitivity. Now, this definition is pretty broad because it leaves the question of what outputs do we care about? And that's where sustainability goals can enter the mix of whether we're talking about reliability goals, equity goals, quality, et cetera. The idea then is that these insights from engineering and economics should inform the robust investments that our infrastructure providers pursue. But hopefully, given my previous two slides, you've gathered that I don't exactly find this to be the case all the time. And this is why I think there's an interesting political economic question here to ask about how the institutional structure of the infrastructure provision process affects the way information is processed into needed investments. So kind of the central question in my research career is, how do the political economic processes responsible for infrastructure investment affect the robustness of shared infrastructure systems? So hopefully the key point that you gather from this presentation is that, in fact, the design of institutions responsible for investment can be just as important as the design of the infrastructure system itself. I have a few different tracks of research that I've started to develop over the course of my past and current research that break down this big question into three buckets and I'll talk through each one of them today: applied modeling of infrastructure systems and governance, empirical work on how policymakers collaborate and make decisions in infrastructure investment, and formal theoretical modeling of infrastructure, political economies. And then I'll go over my future vision for a sustainable infrastructure governance lab and talk a little bit about my teaching philosophy and offerings. When I talk about coupled infrastructure systems, I use this wonderful framework from Marty and colleagues, and this was a figure we published this year that breaks down the infrastructure systems that we care about into operational feedback loops, which we may think of when we think about infrastructure systems dynamics, just whether the infrastructure system is able to distribute and process the flows of material from the natural systems to users that are needed. But we couple these dynamics to political economic feedback loops that concern the investment in the infrastructure system itself. So how do these two gears of operations and political economics interact with each other to deal with exogenous biophysical or exogenous socioeconomic flow changes? So we get to the first kind of track of research that I've started here with looking at applied modeling of infrastructure systems. And I'll talk a little bit about my current and past work on urban water systems in the Phoenix metro area. So remember that political economic feedback loop process. I realize I keep pointing at this one when y'all are looking at that one. In the case of urban water, there's been a lot of urban water scholarship on how the system needs to change. So whether that's investing in new conservation technologies or distributed infrastructure or reuse. The idea then is that we should be able to evaluate the impact of these system changes on the dynamics of our urban water models to uncertain social and environmental futures. But the way that the political economic process enters into these models is three different ways. The first is as a parameter. So we set the policy at a certain level and then see how the urban water system responds. We treat policy as a solution. So we use the model as a way to optimize for a certain desired conservation policy, for instance. Or we treat policy as a rational or rule-based response where it may be dynamic, so we allow policy to change over the course of the model, but it changes according to a rational, almost recipe-like change, if you will, where if there's a certain supply threshold that needs to be met, a certain infrastructure investment is triggered. Well, my contribution here is treating policy as a dynamic response with limitations to rationality. So the question in this line of work is, how does institutional structure interact with a city's water resource portfolio and financial position to affect the sensitivity of water supply, demand, and ratepayer burden to sudden long-term reductions in water availability? And we developed this model of an urban water system that was published in Water Resources Research this year. I'm just going to give you a brief rundown of kind of the general moving parts in the model. The blue lines here are flows of water. And we start with various external water sources to the system that can be used for storage, processing, and delivery to water users. Each of those is an infrastructure type. And demand in the water population can be steered through demand management infrastructure. But remember, entropy. So we need to invest in these systems. And this is where investment flows come into play from rates collected from water users that are used to pay operating costs, service debt, and invest in infrastructure systems. But remember, policy in this model is dynamic. So our infrastructure providers taking in information about supply, demand, and the finance of the infrastructure system make three different choices. The first is short-term measures to invest in demand management because it's quick based on whether supply or demand is met in a given year. Investment decisions, which are based on projections of supply and demand and whether a desired ratio is achieved, and then investing accordingly in needed capacity. And then rate setting, which given projected investment is done to meet a certain debt service coverage ratio. So now these two gears of political economic feedback are interacting with the operational flow of water within the system over time. But remember, the key contribution that I'm making here is the limits to rationality in dynamic policy responses, what I call here institutionally constrained information processing. I like to think of this modeling work as designing a thermostat with friction. So if we think of our kind of canonical thermostat that has a goal temperature setting, it's taking in the temperature of the room and responding with heating or cooling based on the error between the goal and the measurement. We can perhaps think of this ideal sigmoidal response where as error gets experienced, action is achieved by the ideal proportional thermostat. But I'm sure we can all think of our favorite bureaucracy and how this isn't exactly the case in the way information is processed in real world policy situations. And here I'm taking inspiration from punctuated equilibrium theory, which offers two dimensions that I'm using here to make the information processing disproportionate. Now, first is institutional costs, which if you're an economist in the room, you may instantly think of transaction costs. And I think that analogy is okay for now. But essentially, it just refers to decision costs that arise that prevent action from being taken due to things like veto points or additional dependencies in the process. Flexibility pertains to a lack of direction given on what action should be taken given a certain piece of information. So there's not a recipe, if you will, for the decision maker. They have to decide what action is necessary. And so we now apply these two decision-making variables to that ideal sigmoid to get this disproportionate information processing function that with institutional costs, we push the sigmoid to the right, so there's more error required before action can be taken. And with flexibility, we modify the response elasticity of this sigmoid, where now the slope is going down, so there's more partial responses on either side of the threshold because there's not clear direction. We apply this model to 3 different Phoenix metro area cities that were chosen based off of their different water supply portfolios based on the 3 primary sources here in the Phoenix metro area: the Colorado River, the Salt Verde rivers, and groundwater. And we are testing here how they respond to a sudden change in Colorado River availability in 2024. This model was developed in 2021 to 2023. So lucky for us, a lot of the rains in the upper basin saved us from some of the things I'm about to show you. Performance and sensitivity metrics that were used to evaluate the model were as follows. We have 3 different performance metrics: minimum reliability, which just refers to how demand is being met over time, and the minimum of that. So what was the biggest difference between supply and demand over the model run? Ending rate burden, which refers to how much users are having to pay at the end. And ending per capita demand, how much are users forced to use? So it gets at kind of the conservation pressure that is on users by the end. We hit it with a shock in 2024, all the way from no Colorado River availability to, or no change in Colorado River availability to the Central Arizona project goes away for Phoenix. And we hit it with a 50-year model run and are varying those flexibility and institutional cost parameters to see how they matter. The sensitivity metric then, because remember, robustness is the opposite of sensitivity, is a numerator of the change in performance over the change in Colorado River availability change. So remember, we're thinking about operational feedback combined with political economic feedback. So just on the operational side, not changing anything about the institutional context, we can get a sense for what the kind of operational capacity of each of these cities are. The top right figure here, which is the minimum reliability metric, gives you a sense of what is the breakaway point in the existing supply capacity of Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Queen Creek, given the x-axis, which is the magnitude of the cap shock that they experience. And you see here a different point of reliability sensitivity for Scottsdale and Phoenix. I'll get to Queen Creek in a second. But with rate sensitivity, you see a slightly earlier breakaway point because investments are triggered. So that way there's not future reliability implications. On the Queen Creek side, because they are so groundwater dependent, a cap shock doesn't immediately affect them, but because they have a small Colorado River allocation in their back pocket, they don't have the ability to pursue surface water in their future. So they become more entrenched into groundwater, and eventually their groundwater credits go away and they have to resort to serious conservation. And that's why there's high demand sensitivity there for Queen Creek. So they don't escape scot-free. Now, how do institutional costs change the game? Just in the investment action situation, so that thermostat responsible for increasing investment, we see as you increase the costs, as the thermostat gets stickier, eventually you see compromises to reliability in both the Phoenix, Queen Creek, and the Scottsdale case. This y-axis here is the deviation of average sensitivity. So I'm averaging over all of the possible Colorado River shocks they experience. But on the flip side, with those citizen burden metrics of demand and rate, we see that perhaps in institutional costs, a stickier thermostat helps these the rate pressure and demand pressure that the citizens face. And this is a nonlinear trade-off here, right? There's moderate cases of stickiness that that do not trigger reliability compromise, but can benefit the rate pressure experienced by citizens. And in fact, this is often why our institutions become sticky, right? Because there's other objectives that have to be accounted for in the policymaking process. So rigidity traps are those cases where institutional costs are so high that action cannot be taken when needed. And that's this red zone here. The y-axis is that action threshold that's created by the institutional costs. And what we see here in the case of Phoenix, just for example, is by moving southwest on the figure, as you increase the flexibility of the system, you can escape a rigidity trap by creating opportunities for action outside of that costly threshold. Now, I'm running short of time, so I'm going to get into this hopefully in the Q&A, but we've done a lot of cool work to now translate these model results into where we see them in the structural fingerprints of rate-making institutions in the city of Phoenix, for instance. This paper is under review right now, but if you want to learn more about where the rubber hits the road with this stuff, I'd be happy to talk about it in the Q&A. So the key takeaways here are that institutional constraints on information processing should be incorporated into analysis of urban water system robustness to avoid misleading associations that come with rational investment assumptions. Institutional costs may be able to help, they reduce supply robustness, but they may be able to benefit other burden metrics for citizens. Institutional flexibility can benefit the robustness of supply and citizen burden objectives, especially when institutional costs would otherwise create a rigidity trap. So we'll take a little break from modeling now to go into the empirical side of my work, which I've done so far in examining collaborations in Arizona water user associations. So unsurprisingly, there's a lot of water systems in the Maricopa County area that are responsible for, that use 3 different sources. And if we go to Los Angeles, the number of community water systems doubles now to manage 5 different sources. So it begs the question of how coordination should happen with this degree of interconnection. And when dealing with this messy governance situation, oftentimes forums are created. And by forums, I refer to formal spaces for repeated interaction among relevant agents to do things like collaborate on shared interests. When you design a forum in these messy situations, the inclusion consensus trade-off will quickly rear its head. And a few different bodies of work have examined this, whether you're talking about collaborative governance or ecology of games theory. In 2023, we talked a lot about this idea of intermediate forums because you can't include all 101 water users if you want to have good conversations in Arizona, for instance. So you often have to include a subset of relevant actors in these collaborative forums. And so that leaves a design choice to be made about how to navigate the expansion of inclusion in that forum. And there's been a few different pros and cons that have been identified in the literature to expanding inclusion. On the positive side, you may have positive spillovers that are generated where if you have productive discussions with people who are different from you in an inclusive forum, you may translate that into future cooperative activities in other parts of your region. There's an opportunity for added sense of legitimacy, where as you expand inclusion, you are increasing the sense of legitimacy for the forum from the agents within the system. There's also an opportunity for a greater sense of fit because you're capturing more nuance in the perspectives at play. But negatives associated with expanding inclusion often come in 3 different ways. negative spillovers that occur when you force as many people as possible to gather in all the different possible forums. People's time and resources are limited, so you end up potentially compromising other collaborative opportunities. There's an opportunity to re-entrench power, where if you incorporate powerful agents with less powerful agents, then the powerful agents will often just take the forum towards their own ends, and so you further marginalize those less powerful voices. There's transaction costs at play, where as you increase the number of voices, you lower the potential to achieve consensus. But this has led many in the literature to point out that we need more research on how variations in inclusion within similar contexts can have an effect on collaborative effectiveness, efficiency, and legitimacy, which is where the comparative work that I'm going to discuss today fits in. So the question here is, how does the inclusion rule of an intermediate collaborative forum affect participants' perceived functionality of the forum? And I looked at 4 different water user associations in Arizona to examine this. The first one is the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. It's the oldest of the 4, and it's also the most strict, where not only do you have to be a public municipal provider, but there's also a certain water rights requirement that you have to meet of having both a Salt Verde and a Colorado River right to be able to join. So there will not be any more than those 10 joining anytime soon. They also have the highest capacity with their full-time staff and lobbyists. The Northern Arizona Municipal Water Users Association is slightly newer, and they've expanded inclusion outside of just public municipal providers to also include some private providers within the region. They do not have a water rights requirement. Southern Arizona Water Users Association is even more inclusive, where you don't even have to be a municipal user. You just have to use a certain amount of water and be willing to pay the membership fee. So they have a lot of large agricultural users in there, for instance. And then with the West Valley Water Association, they're even broader than that, where you don't even have to be a user. You just have to be someone who's interested in water in the West Valley and be willing to pay the membership fee. They do not have a lobbyist in here, and I'll get into a little bit more about their interesting situation right now. But an important clarification here is that I'm talking about very large water users here. I'm not talking about small farmers that are in these water users associations. Things like cities are the members here that I'm talking about. So we started this work in the summer of 2021 with another one of my PhD colleagues, Sarah, if you know her, in hydro systems. We did some semi-structured interviews with city water managers and a few other agents. And the big question here was understanding how water governance, surface water governance in the Phoenix metro area was dealing with uncertainties in the Colorado River, potential shortages. And what came out of this research was the importance of AMWA as a central coordinating hub for information about and strategizing about the Colorado River. And the key here is that because they bonded a small subset of actors in their intermediate forum, they were able to have augmented capacities, because when you gather around people with similar interests to you, people felt way less threatened about contributing to this common cause because they felt more confident that this organization was going to do what they wanted it to do. But we also found evidence here of the inclusion consensus trade-off, where those 10 users do not represent all municipal users in the Phoenix metro area. And so there were a lot of water users in the Phoenix metro area that didn't have access to these augmented capacities. And that's what led to this comparative study that I'm going to talk more about now, which is primarily based off of a survey that we conducted in February of 2024 with participating members of the 4 Water Users Association. We targeted 93 and collaborated with Water User Association leaders to design this questionnaire and do recruitment. There were 4 different types of questions that we used here. We asked questions about their management concerns, how they perceived regional and sector cooperation using scales from the ecology of games literature, and how they perceive Water User Association functionality, broken out into 3 different types, how they perceive the collaborative process. Do you feel like your voice is being represented? Do you think there's too many people in discussion? Those kind of process-based characteristics. And then questions about beneficial outcomes, which pertain to what do you get out of participating in the association. And then we ask questions about sitting back, kind of overall net impact of your participation. And then what we add that other folks in the literature haven't used is this hypothetical inclusion rule change, where we ask water user association members, what if the inclusion rule was tighter, or what if it was looser? And we adapt specific questions to particular water user associations to see how they evaluate those functionalities would change. We achieved about a 37% response rate here, and this was primarily due to the tricky case of West Valley, where we got no specific responses from West Valley, but we have a few responses from people who are members of both AMWA and West Valley. I'll get into that interesting case in the Q&A if you're wondering why West Valley was difficult. But looking at the overall net benefit results, for starters, I've used an ordinal scale in all of my questions that I discussed. And so the results I'm going to present to you now are proportions of water user association members that cross a certain threshold in their ordinal scale evaluations. So for positive net impact, so people who thought that their water user association participation was at least net positive, we see a drop off from West Valley and the rest, and this primarily is due that AMWA members are comparing West Valley to AMWA because we don't have any West Valley only responses. And then there's a major positive net benefit jump when it comes to AMWA and the rest. Then when we get into these interesting hypothetical questions, the key point that I want to leave you with is that SAWA and AMWA, two water users associations that have very different inclusion rules, have members that are very hesitant to their inclusion rules being changed. So SAWA doesn't want things to get tighter, and AMWA doesn't want things to get looser. Now, when it comes into the beneficial outcomes to participating, the first kind of proportion here that I'm showing is whether or not they thought an outcome was important. And the four kind of benefits that were most important to our water user association members were coordination, cooperation, advocacy, and internal learning, so learning about what other members are doing. And then looking at those four important outcomes, we only found statistically significant evidence that there's kind of a AMWA above the rest scenario, where specifically for coordination and for advocacy, AMWA appears to be providing it very well compared to the other water users association, which is consistent with that interview work that I talked about before. We're using Fisher exact tests here because our sample size is pretty small. Now, looking at the other side of the inclusion consensus trade-off, we have here evidence that SAWA members perceive cooperation much more highly than the other water user association members. Remember, SAWA is the more inclusive water user association. The x-axis here is a cooperative scale that is an aggregate of a few different ordinal measures that we can use on this continuous scale. Positive numbers here indicate perceived cooperation. Negative numbers indicate perceived conflict. And SAWA, we also confirmed with Pearson correlation coefficients, because again, we have this small sample size, that SAWA members perceive high regional cooperation, which is consistent with the literature idea that more inclusive forums tend to have more cooperative perceptions because you become more adept at interacting with people that are different than you. So the key takeaways here are that as sustainability challenges continue across existing jurisdictions, the question of how to design our collaborative forums is key. And in fact, who to include is a crucial design consideration. With tighter inclusion rules, you may be able to augment other capacities that require higher resource contribution, but those are limited to participants. And with looser inclusion rules, there's potential for positive spillover to other cooperative opportunities in the region or sector. I'd love to talk more in the Q&A about how water source characteristics mediate those inclusion benefits, but perhaps that's a trailer for the paper. Lastly, I'll get to my theoretical modeling work. Again, this is a huge track of research that I see taking me a long time, but today I'm just going to talk about institutions, inequality, and system robustness. Remember, with infrastructure politics, it's not just a water question. So this theory exercise is designed at trying to identify political economic patterns that could potentially be applied to other cases of shared infrastructure failures. The question here is, how does the political economic process of infrastructure investment shape the robustness of shared infrastructure systems to social and environmental variation? And in this theoretical effort, there's been a lot of synthesis work where a lot of academic silos have looked at dynamic environments, dynamic voters, dynamic politics, and dynamic infrastructure in various different modeling scenarios. But there has not been an effort to combine all of these insights into a theory of infrastructure political economy, which hopefully this work pushes us in that direction. I started this modeling exercise with an established coupled infrastructure system model from Andrews and Mooney-Piracle that looks at a homogeneous user population using a resource via shared infrastructure that is contributed to via a static tax rate. And the decision that they're making is whether to allocate labor into the shared system or exit the system and seek, for instance, an exogenous wage outside of the system. What I've done now is add in the role of private infrastructure, where now they're not just deciding whether to opt into the shared system, but now they're also making a savings decision of whether or not they want to invest in private infrastructure to access the resource. And I've split the user population into non-elites and elites to look at inequality, any inequality aspects pertaining to earning potential or the potential to convert the resource, the available resource, into welfare, and private investment opportunity, which has to do with your ability to invest in private infrastructure, where even if you have the money, your circumstance may not allow you to invest in private infrastructure. Again, I'm very interested in dynamic politics, so I want the tax policy itself to be dynamic. So I start with having users evaluate a dynamic tax preference. And then when it comes to the shared infrastructure provider deciding what the tax policy should be, I have two different models. The first is a direct aggregation model where simply we're aggregating the votes of the users into what the tax policy should be, or an indirect model of politics via two candidates that are competing to be elected by offering platforms that then the users vote on and the candidates implement those tax policies. And again, I'm interested in robustness, so I'm hitting the shared system with a capacity shock and seeing how the system preserves. I have 6 different political model types that I'm examining here within that direct aggregation and indirect political competition model. With the direct aggregation, I've split it into either a median voter system where everyone has an equal vote and so the median voter wins, pretty simple, or elite capture where the elites get to set the vote. I should say that the way I've designed the model is that there's more non-elites than elites. So really the non-elites control the politics in the median voter case. And then I split each of those cases into hot or cold voter learning assumptions, because remember, tax preferences are dynamic, and this comes from political psychology. The hot voter is one that has a certain directional solution bias. So if you want to think of perhaps a Reaganite conservative who responds to any problem with the economy that taxes should be lowered, there's that directional element of bias for how any problem should be addressed in the political system. The cold voter is being your ideal Bayesian who is updating their preference based off of experience. So whether a certain tax preference gives me good welfare is whether or not I will continue pursuing that preference or not. Then when it comes to the political competition, we break that into equal and income-based, where in the equal situation, candidates value everyone's vote equally, or an income-based situation where the candidates are targeting the preference of the higher income individuals, and then voters learn via candidate messaging. The way I analyze this, because there's many things you can do with this model, is I start with a full shared infrastructure system, and then I hit it with 2 different shocks. The first is a shared infrastructure capacity shock, where simply the shared infrastructure system decreases in capacity. Not that complicated. The private infrastructure opportunity shock is one where I'm giving more private infrastructure opportunity to the elites, so I'm increasing that opportunity inequality. And then I measure the post-shock state. So the key here for determining robustness is whether or not the shared infrastructure used is still being used in the post-shock regime. So does it still exist? Very simple. And the safe operating space is just the space of shocks that the shared infrastructure system was able to be preserved. I'll start with the first proposition here, which is that increasing private infrastructure investment inequality decreases the robustness of a shared system to capacity shocks under user fee revenue generation. By user fees, I'm referring to taxes on the use of shared infrastructure that are being used to fund the shared system. So the easiest example of this is buying your train ticket to take the light rail. And what we find here in the direct aggregation models is that as you move on the x-axis, increasing private opportunity for elites, that eventually the safe operating space decreases. And so the system becomes less robust, and that's because the elites are abandoning the system to pursue private infrastructure, and there's not enough tax revenue in the system to support the shared system. And then the only one that is able to be preserved is this median voter hot model, and that's because there's a solution bias within the system to always favor tax increases when times are tough. So eventually the taxes are increased to a sustainable level, regardless of the inequality. But if there's a big enough shock in the system, they can't overcome that because there's not enough money in the system. If we switch to a total income taxing model where now both private infrastructure and shared infrastructure are being taxed to fund the shared system, we see that the safe operating system space now expands. And in fact, now models that trailed off as inequality increased now are able to be preserved except for the elite capture model. And that's what leads me to proposition 2, which is that total income taxing can increase the robustness to private inequality, provided that the system is insulated from elite capture, because what happens is the elites bail and then just lower the tax rate and doom the shared system. We find that this also holds under political competition. So what this heat map is showing you is shock scenarios where the system was saved by switching to total income taxing. So on the left here, there's a lot of red because there's low inequality, so the system wasn't benefited by switching to total income taxing. But on the right here, this blue area is areas of high inequality that benefited from switching to total income taxing. And there's a difference here when equal voter priority is in play versus income-based voter priority. So it holds that if you value the elites more, your system becomes less robust, even if you have a total income taxing model. One other proposition that I'll leave you with for political competition is that when infrastructure is mediated by political competition, the robustness of the system is sensitive to ideological strength, which is just the way that candidates respond to problems with a swing of their policy preference. So a high ideological strength means that your Reaganite Republican is offering a huge tax decrease as opposed to one closer to the status quo. Time between elections, so just the amount of time they have in office before a candidate changes, and the initial candidate in office. So I'm just giving you here the example of a user fee system with an equal political competition environment. And I have two different incumbents, a tax repulsed and a tax favorable incumbent. And the axes here are those other two metrics, the ideological sensitivity and the time between elections. We have a rigidity trap here in the bottom left corner of both, where there's not enough political opportunity for actions to be taken because there's not enough time, and they aren't willing to take as much of a risk in shifting the policy in one way or the other in their policy recommendations. But the tax favorable incumbent seems to do better, especially if they're given enough time here to be able to maneuver the system in their desired way. Lots more analysis there that I'd love to talk about in the Q&A. So key takeaways is that if you want to model infrastructure political economies, you can't have it both ways, where you can't model infrastructure systems and leave the political economic system as exogenous, because you may generate illusory conclusions about system robustness if you're not accounting for other political factors that can ultimately constrain robustness. But on the flip side, running political economic models that remove the dynamic infrastructure concerns creates politics with no stakes, where you don't have the ability to conclude whether an institution works in all cases because you need to connect it to that operational feedback loop, remember? So now I'll depart from the current and past research to talk a little bit about my future vision for a sustainable infrastructure governance lab, where every week is infrastructure week. And so the lab vision here is that I look forward to producing and communicating knowledge related to infrastructure, politics, and sustainability with a few key components. The first is that I want to consider multiple different sustainability goals outside of just reliability concerns, for instance, multiple infrastructure types outside of just urban water, and participatory research, where I've done a lot of work with water managers in the creation of the urban water model that I showed you and the questionnaire that I also showed you. But I want to expand this participatory research also out to community members and community organizations involved in the infrastructure political process. I think that good participatory action work also needs good theoretical work, because what the theory development in parallel allows us to do is bring individual cases into discussion of patterns that can be used to inform future cases and future work. I want my work to be local and global, not only involved in the local situation where hopefully I can find a job, as well as the global network of environmental systems scholars that I've begun forming relationships with through my role as a Bayer Young Scholar in the Royal Academy of Sciences in Sweden. And I want mentoring to be involved with students throughout all phases of the research, from conceptualization to communication of results. So looking back at the research trajectory that I've been on, we've started with applied systems work, looking at 2 dimensions of institutionally constrained information processing in urban water systems, and empirical work having to do with the inclusion consensus trade-off in collaborative forum design, and theoretical work having to do with inequality, taxing mechanisms, and political competition. And what I see now is kind of my long-term targets, where I want to take these 3 big buckets of research within infrastructure politics, is on the applied systems modeling route, looking at water, transportation, energy, healthcare, education, and other shared infrastructure systems that can benefit from this incorporation of the political economic feedback loop with the operational concerns in systems modeling, and again, with participatory approaches with managers and communities. On the empirical side, the big question here is about use of information, collaboration, and decision-making of infrastructure policy makers and managers, with a particular concern with the role of multiple uncertainties in this process, especially not only pertaining to the environment, but also social and funding-based uncertainties. On the theoretical modeling side, kind of the big pie-in-the-sky dream is to get to a theory of political economic fit to social and environmental variation. So given the social and environmental context, are there certain political regimes that are best situated to ensure the robustness of infrastructure systems or sustainability goals that we care about? And also incorporating complexity through heterogeneity in users, infrastructures, information, and policy types. In the short term, hopefully in the next 3 or 5 years, I want to take these tracks in the following ways. On the applied systems modeling side, I've begun a direct potable reuse project with another former ASU colleague, Marisa Manim, who's now at University of Buffalo, looking at institutional emergence in that space, also incorporating participatory modeling. I want to bring inequality into the urban water models that I showed you earlier today. We've already begun doing this in Las Vegas, for instance, and connect with local managers and organizations, again, wherever I'm lucky enough to get a job. On the empirical side, I'm very interested in the role of funding uncertainty with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Job Acts, especially in how this funding uncertainty translates into water and transportation investment priorities and collaborative behavior in interlocal and interstate collaborations that are now becoming paramount in the implementation of these huge baskets of federal money. On the theoretical side, I want to add in the role of environmental variation and technical advising, especially increasing policy dimensionality, because remember, in that theoretical model that I just showed you, the only policy was what should the tax rate be. So I want to increase the dimensionality of that policy space, for instance. All right, we'll finish off with teaching, my philosophy and offerings. So my general teaching philosophy is that to prepare critical sustainability or policy thinkers and professionals, we need to incorporate insights from complex systems management that I use in my research also into what students experience in the classroom. And just as in any sustainability or policymaking case, you can run around like a chicken with your head cut off if you don't have a clear objective and purpose. So too do I think that needs to be conveyed in the classroom, especially when coming into classes that require a serious amount of quantitative thinking and methods. Some of my favorite lectures to do are ones that focus on quantitative intuition and coupling real world scenarios and examples into the equations that, for instance, you see on the board. And luckily, being a graduate student during COVID and inflation has given me a lot of examples to choose from. These course evaluation quotes here just provide a little sense of what my students have said about me. I also think that just as you need to have clear objectives, you also have to have diversity in the possible ways that learning can be demonstrated to meet those objectives through multiple different evaluation forms. When I was a co-instructor with the Sustainable World course, we saw everything from social media campaigns to phone apps to business pitches, policy memos, et cetera, that we're all trying to get at a common final project. And then, of course, we can't be good complex systems folks without talking about feedback. And so I think that it's important to incorporate that both from me to students and students to me. In the courses that I've been a part of, we've incorporated pre, mid, and post reflections for students where students are able to be reflexive about the learning process and goals that they have throughout the semester and convey that to me so I can tailor the course accordingly and use multiple deliverables before final grades are issued to allow time for feedback. And apparently I'm pretty accessible. And the last pillar here is productive humility, which I think is essential for complex sustainability and policy challenges, being openness to known and unknown relationships throughout the course of my career. If the AI doesn't kill us, perhaps there will be many different tools that we have to incorporate and new skills to teach about. And again, some more quotes from my course evaluations. So finally, some possible offerings that I think I can give to the department come in 3 different forms. The first is politics and policy related courses that I can offer on the policy process and specific content related courses related to environmental politics or infrastructure and water policy. On the methods side, I can teach both quantitative and qualitative methods as I have experience with survey and interview work, but also computational systems modeling. And then of course, as Morpheus showed you in the meme, a pet project of mine is a course on modeling political systems. On the sustainability side, I think I can offer courses in systems thinking, robustness, resilience, and transformation, and the role of infrastructure and water in sustainability. Hopefully, by the end of this, you've gathered the key points. Design of institutions for investment is just as important as the design of infrastructure itself. And thank you for your attention. Because this is the School of Sustainability, I also want to acknowledge my wonderful lab, the Center for Behavior, Institutions, and the Environment, and my awesome mentors, Marty, Margaret, Elizabeth, Aaron, who aren't here, and Marco, and the wonderful funding I've been able to make use of from the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship. Thanks, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Okay, if you have questions, raise your hand and either Taylor or I will run a mic to you.
That was great. Thank you for the presentation. My question's about your first bucket. I'm interested in like a special class of cases where the optimal decision is not to invest in the infrastructure, but to abandon it. And I'm thinking of like Tuvalu, Kiribati, New Orleans, places that in the relative near future are going to have some pretty big decisions to make. How big do we, make the wall? How much do we enhance the levee? How robust should we go? Just wondering if you could speak to that.
Okay, and those latter two cases that you said of increasing the wall, for instance, is different than the question you're asking about abandoning the infrastructure, right? Because I would say that the latter few questions about expanding the size of existing infrastructure trajectories are definitely something that kind of the current modeling approach that I've used would be able to fit within. I think that those questions are extremely interesting, and as someone who's also been thinking a lot about the Detroit case of situations where lots of physical infrastructure has been invested in a city that now has abandoned population that may not be able to continue to fund that very large infrastructure. I would say that it comes down to what goals you put into the thermostat. So if the thermostat has a goal to ensure safety of the area via water walls, then it's going to, just as if you stick a air conditioner in 120-degree Phoenix, it's going to keep pumping out cooling until it breaks. The thermostat doesn't think about, oh, maybe you should relocate. So it then comes down to building in other feedback controllers into the system that get at kind of those higher level questions, which I think are completely consistent with the math. It just depends on which feedback controllers you care about. And that's where the participatory approaches come into play, because you talk with people about what are your goals and what are you evaluating to decide how we set the thermostats, if you will. But that's a super important thing to think about. Yeah, Josh.
First, well, it's weird hearing my voice that way. So first of all, really great presentation. Really, like I can say it's difficult to model these sorts of systems. And so it's really cool to see so much progress in a difficult area. That said, I have kind of two questions. One, when you're looking at these sort of institutional variables, so like your sensitivity or institutional cost, right, or flexibility and institutional cost, for example. It's one thing to look at that within a model, sort of a qualitative sort of comparison. Yes, you have some loose calibration there, but how do you actually say, okay, well, this water user association is, in this part of parameter space, right? Like, so how do you kind of think towards parameterization so that you can actually say something about a particular setting as opposed to sort of general tendencies, right? And then I have sort of a broader question, which is, as a sustainability scholar, you have to have thought about in this space where you're thinking about political dimensions and modeling the politics itself, the political institutions themselves. Who are the stakeholders for this research? Like, at the end of the day, how is this going to communicate or lead to change? Because in some sense, you're modeling the very endogenous sort of set of political institutions, and then the people that you would perhaps want to give this to are interested parties within it. And so I'm just a little bit curious about, as you kind of pursue this research further and you're thinking about how you engage, if you think about this as an engaged form of research, what is the sort of theory of change of how this work feeds into that, given that these people are sort of interested in robustness, but they may be really interested in the robustness of the political system that they themselves are governing. So I know I gave you two hard ones there, but.
Yeah, luckily, I think my first answer kind of hits both. And that's that the best way that I see of using the kind of bucket of models that I talked about at the start, with the urban water one being an example, is as communication objects in a conversation with managers or other agents within the system, because what they allow you to do is kind of assess what your institutional bandwidth is. for instance, in your water system. So while we may not be able to look at the rule book of the City of Phoenix water rate making process and say, oh, that's an institutional cost of 1.15. We can sit down and say, well, how much give does our institutional system have to a Colorado River shock given our existing operating capacity? So maybe the way that we have our operating system set up is we have a very narrow, perhaps using another policy process term, policy window to be able to act on this. We need to be able to have a quick action within this 2 years, which means that there cannot be very sticky thermostats at play. And again, these are qualitative terms. It's not like 1.2 is sticky and 1.1 is not sticky. But with that continuous parameter, we can see what happens as you make the thermostat stickier, if you will. And then perhaps see where opportunities for flexibility can come into play. So if we have this rate-making process, for instance, that has a ton of veto points and different dependencies that have to work through different people to consult, we may be very worried about whether we can get a rate change passed quickly in a year or a few years. And so we say, well, what happens if we add some more flexibility to the system? And this model may allow you to have those conversations. These models are not decision support tools, so they're not designed to give you an exact number at the end of the day of a certain desired infrastructure trajectory, but they allow you to have conversations within a common boundary object. And actually, when we had these conversations with Phoenix metro area water managers in the summer of 2022, when the Colorado River fear was very salient, it was almost like a therapy session with these water managers, where they have these fears in their mind about what their system can take, and what the model allows them to do is have conversations around a table of, oh, well, it seems like we have a lot of give in this part of our system. Phoenix, for instance, is able to deal with quite a large amount of Colorado River shock because of prior investments that they were fortunate enough to make. What was really cool was that putting up things like the coupled infrastructure systems framework to these managers almost triggered a light bulb for some of them of saying, these are the exact flows that I'm thinking about when I have meetings with city council, for instance. We actually sent a slide of the framework over to one manager who wanted to use it with a city manager. But to get at your other question about parameterization, the way I did it in the urban water model was the institutional cost has a very easy kind of intuition to think of for parameterization, where it's just what is your real threshold. So we say that we want to have a 10 or 20% buffer in supply over our projected demand in case something happens with supply. But the real threshold where we're actually compelled to act perhaps is 10% lower than that. We won't really pursue investment until we get to that kind of 10% mark. So that would be kind of the real way to parameterize institutional costs. And you may be able to get that empirically. So you may be able to look at an urban water system that experienced supply shocks, say like Cape Town, and look at when investments were able to occur based on what they knew about supply demand trajectories. With flexibility, it becomes a little bit more challenging because we're talking about the slope of a sigmoid that is kind of indirectly calculated in the exponential equation. But the parameterization ultimately comes down to what do you think the bandwidth is for probable action? So do we think that there's partial responses that are possible on either side? And then I'll conclude with your addition about the stakeholder audience. But I had these conversations with water managers, but I believe that these same conversations can happen with anyone who's involved in the infrastructure political process. And in fact, there may be different goals that should come into the model or different outcomes that I should be measuring. And that's where those conversations I look forward to having in the future. So thanks.
So great job. One of the policies that you were interested in analyzing in the future referred to future infrastructure bills, and a lot of these infrastructure bills have justice considerations built on it to try to understand the benefits of that for disadvantaged communities. I was just wondering, how do you incorporate historical legal legacies of infrastructure injustices in these communities and differences in access to participation for these stakeholders?
Yeah. On the theoretical side, I think it comes into play at its core because I think one of the core features of infrastructure systems are a way to integrate over social inequalities, where if we had a situation where everyone had the ability to put their own well in the ground, do their own treatment, then we wouldn't need shared infrastructure. But shared infrastructure has at the core of its ethos is one of providing a way to integrate over those social differences. So I would say, and in the theoretical modeling, I try to play with different assumptions within the political process based off of whose voice matters in the political competition process, or even directly when elites get to set the tax rate. And so that will continue to be a part of my theoretical side. But on the applied side, I think that I need to first start having conversations with not just infrastructure managers. And a lot of that will depend on where I'm fortunate enough to get a job after ASU. There are many environmental justice groups that I've had a chance to research at the different places that I'm applying to that talk about things like water access and transportation access that have core features within the Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so a lot of those communications will hopefully direct my future applied systems modeling efforts of what political considerations are paramount to those groups. But on the empirical side, I'm primarily interested in the way policymakers navigate their collaborative behavior and use of information. But that doesn't mean that the justice doesn't directly enter, because one of the things that policymakers have to evaluate are those justice mandates that come down from the Inflation Reduction Act and an Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So an interesting thing will be to see how those new priorities in those infrastructure acts force collaborations with community organizations that perhaps didn't have a chance to be involved in the infrastructure planning process prior. So I definitely see an opportunity to include those considerations in each of the buckets. Thanks.
So thanks everyone for coming. This was a really good opportunity for Adam to do a practice job talks. Fabulous. Please feel free to hang around after. There's food in the back, and ask more questions of Adam or give some feedback for the job talk for him kind of going on the market soon. And then hopefully we'll see you all here next week for Rebecca's presentation. So thank you, Adam, again.
Thank you.